What's up, folks? I'm Chris, your NFL writer here at Occupy Fantasy, here with a look at week number 9 of the UFL season. I'm going to go over some of the top plays you're going to want to use in your DraftKings lineups in UFL DFS this weekend. Yes, we are somewhat limping to the finish here with two, I would say, kind of preseason-esque weeks to close out the regular season with all of the playoff drama basically settled here in the United Football League. We're going to have the Birmingham Stallions versus the Michigan Panthers in the USFL Conference Championship game in 2 weeks. And we're going to have the St. Louis Battlehawks and the San Antonio Brahmas facing off in the XFL Conference Championship in 2 weekends from now as well. Can't wait to break down that action for you all here when we get there. But we do have some opportunities, I think, to still leverage the plays that are in front of us to potentially grow our DFS bankrolls as we close out the regular season here in the UFL. And my favorite play on the board is going to be Michigan Panthers starting running back Matthew Colburn this weekend against the Houston Roughnecks. So the Panthers are only 3-point favorites this weekend, which actually means betting markets are considering Michigan and Houston to be the most competitive game on the board this weekend. But the biggest thing that is going to help Matthew Colburn produce in fantasy here in week number 9 is that there's not a tremendous amount of competition for touches in the backfield this week. Unfortunately, Wes Hills went on injured reserve after leaving week 8's game with an injury, so he's done for the season. There are backup running backs, obviously, on the roster. Nate McCrary is probably going to be activated to play here in week number 9, and Michigan did sign another tailback that may crack the active roster. But I don't think either of these guys is going to be a threat to Colburn's workload unless we get some reporting that indicates otherwise. Colburn against the Roughnecks defense at just $8,000 with some of the more expensive running backs looking a little precarious at this point. Going to be a really, really strong play here and probably is going to be the most popular running back on the board. The biggest favorite this weekend, who else, guys? The Kings of Spring Football, the Birmingham Stallions. We're going to have to wait and see if CJ Marable rejoins the active roster for week 9. I do think he is healthy. I think they just sat him last week to rest him up for the playoff games. Even if Marable's back, though, I don't know if I want to invest in the split backfield here between Ricky Person and whoever is behind him as the RB2. Roundtree, if he is the second running back again this weekend against San Antonio, I might be interested in him at his $5,500 cost. But either way, we can expect Ricky Person to still be the lead guy in this backfield with double-digit carries and a few targets from Adrian Martinez. Adrian Martinez is probably the player that we absolutely want to play. I think there's a pretty good argument if you're MMEing the last couple of regular season weeks of UFL football that you just lock Adrian Martinez into your lineup because that's how efficient he has been. He hasn't scored less than 28 fantasy points in a start yet this season. This is the first game between the Stallions and the Brahmas, and this could be a potential championship preview. We get Martinez's production through the air, but we also get 5+ rush attempts on the ground and an opportunity potentially for some rushing touchdowns with the mobile Adrian Martinez. So love playing him to take advantage of Birmingham being the biggest favorites for that reason. And to be clear, if we get reporting that they've decided to rest Martinez because they've already locked up everything here this season, I am also going to be interested in Matt Corral at $9,500. But we're operating with the assumption that it's going to be Adrian Martinez once again for the Stallions. DC and Memphis. This is a game that is virtually meaningless other than guys trying to get stuff on film to try to get back to the National Football League potentially. Both DC and Memphis are eliminated from playoff contention. DC is favored by 5 points on the road against the Showboats, and they probably should be. This is probably the best eliminated team in the league. Memphis, very porous offensive line, giving up a ton of sacks on their quarterbacks, not really letting the Memphis offense get in any sort of a rhythm at all this season. That's going to make the defender's defense one of the most popular plays at $4,600 this week. There's no real running back that I am tremendously excited about here, but Darius Hagans did play ahead of Cameron Harris last weekend. So if you're looking for tournament differentiation here in the Shovel Pass on DraftKings Large Field Tournament, I would play Hagans over Cameron Harris if you are playing a DC running back, but I'm not really playing either of these guys. The other favorite, St. Louis favored by 3.5 points. We saw Wayne Gallman return to form last week, I would say. He split work with Jacob Sailors in the game against the DC Defenders in week number 8. He had a target and 9 carries. We saw Jacob Sailors have a target and 10 carries. So at cost here, Sailors at $9,800, the most expensive running back on the board. It's hard for me to justify playing Jacob Sailors knowing that it seems like the Battlehawks are ramping up the workload for Wayne Gallman now. Not necessarily overreacting too much to a big box score performance, 2 rushing touchdowns for Wayne Gallman. When I say that, I'm reacting to the workload. These guys basically split the snaps in this game, so paying all the way up for Jacob Sailors probably feels like a mistake at this point at the running back position. Sorry to say that. Underdog running backs from these other teams on the other side of the Battlehawks game, give me all the De'Veon Smith I can get this week. He has had double-digit carries in each of the last 3 games. There isn't really any other tailback on the Renegades roster that is doing anything notable to be worried about in fantasy football. They just placed Letty Brown on injured reserve. Devin Darrington is the only other tailback that we have to worry about on the roster at this point. And he has seen a grand total of 3 touches in 2 weeks of football. So it does seem like De'Veon Smith is going to be a strong play at $7,600 in a relatively neutral game script situation at home for the Renegades. So I think he's also a player I'm going to try to get into my lineups this weekend. Quarterbacks. I mentioned I do think locking Martinez is viable. There are only 4 teams at this point that are going to be playing a quarterback every single down. And so that means those are probably the only 4 teams we should be considering at all. Luis Perez with the Arlington Renegades drops back 30-plus times per game, doesn't really do much on the ground for us. So he's always going to be an option for differentiation in tournaments. Jordan Ta'amu is the other guy with the DC Defenders, ignoring week 7 when he got knocked out with a concussion. He has played every single snap virtually for the Defenders at quarterback. He just hasn't really been efficient at all. He hasn't given us a ceiling game that we've been excited about, but he's an option. Probably the best quarterback to consider will be the Battlehawks quarterback, whoever that is. I think they will rest A.J. McCarron again with St. Louis's playoff spot locked up, with home field in the XFL Conference Championship virtually locked up. So that means we get an opportunity to play Manny Wilkins, who played all of the snaps last week at quarterback. You see the passing production was kind of underwhelming. Just 18 attempts on his dropbacks, 126 yards, no passing touchdowns. But the rushing production at the quarterback position is always something that should catch our eye. 12 rush attempts, 79 yards, likely to score a touchdown at that kind of volume if it continues. $9,000, significantly less expensive than Adrian Martinez. Wilkins probably my favorite play other than Martinez if you want to get difference at the quarterback position. Once again, that's if he does draw another start here in week number 9. Every other team I don't want to play at quarterback. We have reporting that Chase Garbers is going to be active for the Brahmas and potentially split reps with Dormady here against the Stallions in week number 9. So we can cross both those guys off our list because we don't want to play a split quarterback position. And the same is true for each of the Michigan Panthers, the Houston Roughnecks, and the Memphis Showboats. So we don't really need to spend any time on their quarterbacks as far as fantasy football is concerned. What we need to talk about are wide receivers on the board. Yes, Hakeem Butler, most expensive player, going to have the best projection in spring football once again here in week number 9. He's an option. We have Justin Hall, who I think is the second best option as far as projections go this week from the Houston Roughnecks. John Trey Kirkland still underperforming his opportunity without a receiving touchdown since week 2 now. Still leading this team in targets and air yards. Hasn't been able to get in the box, so have to pay up for it, but there is a tournament option there and some reverse correlation, if you will, with Adrian Martinez. We have Sal Cannella, who has seen the opportunities just absolutely consolidate over the last couple of weeks. 9 targets in each of the last 2 games, 6+ targets in each of the last 4 touchdowns in the last 3 weeks. He's absolutely a player that Luis Perez trusts in this Renegades offense, and even though his price is going up, it's still not tremendously expensive to get Sal Cannella in your lineups at $7,900. We have opportunity with the Defenders wide receivers. We learned last week, now with Kelvin Harmon on injured reserve and out for the season, how DC is going to play their players. Ty Scott is the most expensive defender wide receiver at $6,700. He's a outside the numbers boundary wide receiver who's going to have a high average depth of target role that's valuable in fantasy football. 6+ targets and a touchdown in each of the last 2 weeks obviously reflects that. The opportunity here, though, lies with a couple of guys that were thrust into starting roles last week. Brandon Smith actually did run more routes than Ty Scott by 1 route last week, according to PFF. He's the other outside boundary wide receiver in this offense. 8 targets last week, 88 air yards, just 4 receptions, 40 yards. At that kind of target volume, at that air yard distance, there's a ceiling here that hasn't necessarily happened yet. So if the usage stays the same, Brandon Smith at a low cost is going to be interesting. Kiki QT also had a ton of opportunities. You see 1 reception for 6 yards, but he had 6 targets. He had a ton of air yards for the defenders in week number 9, and he actually operated largely out of the slot. So QT, Brandon Smith, and Ty Scott are going to be your starting wide receivers for the defenders in week 9, and Chris Rowland is going to be the 4th guy who mixes in and sees a decent amount of opportunities. 7 targets last week. He did run the 4th most routes behind the 3 guys I've already mentioned. And all of these DC defender wide receivers, even including Ty Scott, not tremendously expensive at all. I don't have a problem playing any of these guys. And that's the salary relief, in my opinion, you need to make a lineup like this work with the best quarterback in the league and a couple of the best running back opportunities left for volume on offenses that have been efficient. So Brandon Smith being the cheapest of the bunch, I will just plug him in here just to play out things here on the rest of the video. My favorite defense is going to be the Renegades, just at cost, $3,400 against the Battlehawks. The Battlehawks offense did not seem as explosive with Manny Wilkins under center because of how much he pulled it down and ran with it. So I do think there's an opportunity for this Renegades defense to give us an average number at this position without completely killing our lineups. But if we're going to pay up for any team this weekend, I think the one to pay for, as I mentioned earlier, is the DC Defenders against the very sack-prone and turnover-prone Memphis Showboats. Other wide receivers that I'm interested in that I haven't discussed, he's not underperforming his opportunities, but Kiki Chisholm here with Houston, very, very big role. We saw the 10 targets last week against Birmingham. His price has basically stayed in this mid-tier over the last few weeks of play, seeing virtually equal opportunities in this offense to Justin Hall, who is extremely expensive at $8,500. So Chisholm at $6,200 is an option. And then we have the other elite tight end behind Sal Cannella in Cody Latimer as I think a decent bring back with Adrian Martinez for a Birmingham and San Antonio stack. Ton of opportunities last week for Latimer against the Arlington Renegades, and there's an opportunity for that to happen again here in week number 9 against the Birmingham Stallions. The underperforming wide receivers this week. Jonathan Kirkland, mentioned him already. There are 2 of them from that DC Defenders wide receiver room that I mentioned, who I have slotted into the lineup, and it's going to be Kiki QT, who both are looking at underperforming their recent opportunities by over 10 points in the last 3 weeks. Tyler Vaughns with the Arlington Renegades saw his workload go up a little bit last week, so he's back on the underperforming wide receiver list. 9 targets last week, still no touchdowns since week 3 for Mr. Vaughns. We have Marcus Sims with the Michigan Panthers as the final underperforming wide receiver. 1 reception for 5 yards, a major womp there with the Michigan Panthers for the speedy, high average depth of target, deep threat wide receiver Marcus Sims, still leading this team in opportunities at the position. They've had a little bit of a revolving door behind him in production, and obviously dealing with the quarterback tandem has been somewhat of an issue for his production, but the opportunity is still there at $7,500 for us to leverage. So that's a little bit about how I am feeling about week number 9 here in the UFL. Good luck if you're going to be playing UFL contests here on DraftKings this weekend. As always, can't let you forget that there are free projections in our Discord every weekend for Occupy Fantasy Discord subscribers. It just costs $2.99 a month to buy a membership here on YouTube or to subscribe to our Discord to get access to those. You're not going to want to miss that because we're giving away basically all the insights that you need to build successful lineups here in UFL DFS. And we still have week 9, week 10, the playoff weeks to go. Projections for just the classic slates and all of these single game showdowns that are available on DraftKings to play fantasy UFL. Good luck this weekend, guys, and I'll be back next week to wrap up the UFL regular season and talk to you about week 10?